Okay, so thank you very much, Sachlila and Karanadi. So I thought I'd call my talk from idealism to responsiveness. So actually, you've started to introduce that theme. And it's really just a few thoughts that I've had, partly given the current situation, and also something that I've been reflecting on recently. A few thoughts from someone who, as Chandraprabha said, has been working in institutions all my adult life. Sometimes very happily, most of the time very happily, sometimes not so happily, as life is. So the first part of this talk is about a journey to idealism. So as Chandraprabha mentioned, I came to the Dharma very young. I think I used to think a lot, particularly in childhood, about the way things are and who people are and what life is all about. And yes, I used to reflect quite deeply on things. I remember going to India when I was 10. I think that was the major sort of part of my story, where I saw a level of poverty in which human life is dispensable. I think that's what shocked me about India when I was 10, is that in a way it didn't really matter. You know, one more person falls off a train, you know, who cares really? And that kind of attitude, that disregard for human life shocked me to quite a deep level. And I realised something that Bhante actually, one of his talks, calls the burden of existence. I sort of felt this existence was mine. And I was there responsible for my own life and how to shape it. And I had this absolute terror of a life without meaning. I think that's what I was most frightened of, was just wasting this opportunity, having this life and wasting it. But at the same time, actually having that sense from probably about the age of 10 is quite a burden. You know, it's like, right, what am I going to do? You know, and looking around me and not really finding an answer. But I did go on a kind of investigation of people's lives, and I was brought up a Christian, so I ended up looking at the lives of kind of great Christians, people who really made a contribution for other people, who made a contribution to others with their lives, who did something meaningful and usually died young. And I realised about myself as I came into the movement. Of course, at some point I was introduced to Buddhism, and I really had a very strong kind of sense that actually this is it. This is what I need to do with my life. I didn't really know why or how, but I had that very, very immediate sense. And I realised from my beginning of my involvement with the Sangha that I was happiest when I was working with other people on a project. I remember we used to, in those days, it was the South London Centre, and we used to have all our retreats in this field near Glastonbury. And it took quite a lot of work setting it up. And I remember going into the centre, and there were these photos up on the board of the weekend retreat and of everyone helping setting up. And there was me, you know, this little thing. Looking really, really happy and delighted in this field covered in mud, trying to set something up. And I realised, oh yeah, actually, I'm part of this. I'm part of these people. If someone new comes into this centre, they're going to look at this board and they're going to think, oh, she's part of the Sangha. And I really kind of got a sense from that. I really enjoyed myself in a different way. You know, sometimes I felt like I didn't have a lot to say to people on a personal level, and you know, I was much younger than most people there. So actually, working together enabled me to have a context for communication as well. And also, I've been someone who's not particularly afraid to take on responsibility. I think I've got that sort of personality that decides to take on the responsibility and then sort of has a kind of confidence that I'll grow into it, whatever that responsibility is. And sometimes I've taken on a bit too much, but I've sort of got that confidence, and some way I'll grow into it. Something will happen and it'll be a learning experience. Actually, yeah, it's kind of pretty much worked so far. But there was I think there's also been, given that kind of personality type in the movement, there's been a sort of experience where it's almost actually more like the responsibility took on me. So it's that kind of responsibility that you take in the movement where everyone else leaves, and then you're like, oh, I'm at the front. What happened? Where did you go? So I remember I was working in the evolution shop in my holidays when I went to university, and I joined the team after university, Matty will know. And then it was, I sort of slowly became manager, but I have to say I never really made the decision to be manager. It's just that everyone left. All my friends left, including Matty. Anyway, it was, I grew. Yeah, so there was that kind of part of taking responsibility as well. And then I started to work in the Sheffield Buddhist Centre and became Mitra convener there. And then I came to Triratna Loka. I think for me, all of those contexts have actually been, you can call them institutions. Again, that word can bring up that to mind, that sort of Victorian building with a statue of a man outside. And it, in a way, well, what is an institution really? For me, I think my experience is a context of friendship. If I think about all of those projects, in a sense, all those institutions, Evolution, Sheffield Buddhist Centre, Triratna Loka, actually they've been about people. I don't really think of them, I think about Vajratara or Vajratara, or I think about, people who I work with, the team at Triratna Loka, and working with Moksha Leela at Sheffield Buddhist Centre, and Vedanya and Surya Mati. So it's not really to me about a thing, it's about a network of friendships and an exploration with people. And I think from that point of view I've really, really benefited, and those experiences have been very, very precious to me. And largely I've been very happy to do that. I think I am naturally happiest when I'm working quite hard for a project which I feel is meaningful for other people. So the other side of that is that I can be quite a sort of forceful character, and that kind of confidence that sort of breaks through barriers sometimes undermines myself, and also can have an effect on other people, a negative effect on other people. I also have a tendency to rant, which I'm working on. Sometimes I'm working better than others. But anyway, so it came to me, sort of clear to me over time, a sort of shadow side of that taking responsibility. There's a really wonderful, actually, introduction to St. Mark's Gospel by Nick Cave, which is really an exploration of his understanding of the spiritual life, which I find very, very interesting. There's a bit where he says, "But you grow up, you do, you mellow out. Buds of compassion push through the cracks in the black and bitter soil. Your rage ceases to need a name. You no longer find comfort watching a whacked out God tormenting a wretched humanity. As you learn to forgive yourself and the world, the God of old begins to transmute into your heart. Base metals become silver and gold, and you warm to the world." I think there was a side of my character that sees things in opposition and can see things in terms of problem, and there was a kind of rage against that. And I think it has taken me some time to sort of, warm to the world, learning to forgive myself and to forgive the world, particularly when I see injustice and unkindness towards people. And I've really had to sort of force myself to look at, well, what is idealism and what's the shadow side of idealism? Actually, I looked up idealism in the dictionary, and it says the practice of forming or pursuing ideals, especially unrealistically. And it defines ideals as perfect but existing only in imagination. It's a word that comes from Platonism, where something exists as an archetype on its sort of own imaginal level. So I suppose the problem about ideals is that in one case you're holding something that's very, very precious. It's something that appears in the imagination as something real and precious to you. But ideals can be abstract notions. So there's the benefit of, and I can see this in my own life, seeing suffering, seeing dukkha, seeing something of immense beauty in the Dharma and immense potential, the potential even of Buddhahood. And wanting to bring that perfection into the world, wanting to bring Buddhahood into the world, wanting to bring the bodhicitta into the world, wanting to bring the imagined into reality. But I think there's a kind of dark side or a shadow side of that, which is when it's easy to sidestep reality for what it is. You're so concerned with bringing in to existence the idealized reality that you can forget, or we can forget, what's actually happening on the ground. And the danger is that the ideals become ends in themselves. And actually I did have a taste of this when I was younger. Because I had such a sort of strong response to the spiritual life, I was very involved in Christianity. And what I realised is, again, I was one of those teenagers that would sit in mass and read all the lessons and really think about it. And then I try and ask my family about it afterwards, and they were like, "What?" I realised that no one else was listening. Not one of them. Anyway, so I was really thinking about all these things, and in a very kind of sincere way, went to see the priest at 14 to be confirmed in the Catholic Church, and he gave me a picture of Jesus to colour in. And he was just on the phone. He didn't, and then he got off the phone. I didn't colour in the picture of Jesus, age 14. If I did, he would have had black hair. I just want to make that point, and brown skin. Anyway, I didn't colour in the picture of Jesus to make a political point. I just left it, and then went to have my chat with the priest. He got off the phone and just basically said, "Right, okay, we'll do it this time." And I realised that for the church, I was a number. There was no humanity in there. There was no kind of interest in someone who might be interested in pursuing the Catholic path. In the end, yes, the Catholic Church left me, but well, that's another story. So I think it really taught me something actually about how religious institutions can work and how they can sort of stifle the buds of a real spiritual practice. And when I came to Buddhism, I think the thing that really attracted me was that there was a path of self-transformation and that each individual was taken seriously. I think what had the biggest effect for me was firstly doing the metta bhavana and realising that there was a path to love, that you weren't just told to be more loving, but there was a path, and that people were interested in my path. So it was a very, very big lesson for me when I was 17, that people would talk to me as if I was an adult and be interested in what I had to say and discuss things with me. And I remember long evenings lying on the sofa in the Utpala South London community talking to Dharmaruchi about Nietzsche and the Buddha and Bhante and all sorts of things. But sometimes, again, in the movement, I have had unhappy times. And I think there is a relationship between those unhappy times and something about when the ideals or even the institutions become more important than the individual. And I don't think it's always necessarily imposed from outside. I think sometimes I've seen it done to ourselves. I did live in one community in Sheffield that I was quite unhappy in. And I can remember the feeling of dread as the key went into the lock and I knew I was home. It was a really bad feeling. And I think what was happening there was that people felt that they should live in a community, but they didn't really want to. And I have to say, I'm so glad those days are over. I really do think they are over. I haven't heard of anyone living in a community when they don't really want to, but it was almost like they felt that's what they should do as a Buddhist. And I'm keen that we don't repeat that as far as possible. it's almost like the ideals become more important than the lived experience. And so that's something that I am on the lookout for in myself, and also in people who are in the ordination process, who I come into contact with a lot. There's a great quote from Dr. Ambedkar where, he really saw the ugly side of religious institutions and thought a lot about the issues that arise. And he's got a quote where he says, religion is for man and not man for religion. And I think, by the way, we can take man as humanity, just to make that point. But yes, religion is for man, not man for religion. And he talks about great men, great women, or anyone else, mankind. In a way, he's talking about idealism. What he says is that even great men can impose a structure, can impose maxims and conclusions onto the individual by force. And then you get a kind of a distortion of what the religious life can really be. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about how we can impose a structure, how we can impose maxims and conclusions on other people. I mean, obviously, we're not going to, I hope not going to use actual physical violence, but I think in myself, I've certainly imposed ideas onto other people by a force of intellect. I think I have been guilty of that. I can think things through very quickly, and I'm very certain and confident about my ideas. So sometimes I can really I think I have imposed that just by a sort of force of will, without really exploring where the other person's coming from. And I think I've done that to myself as well. I've had an idea about what the spiritual life should be, what the life of an order member should be, and I've imposed that sometimes on myself. I think there's always a balance to be struck between the healthy going beyond preferences and having an idea of what I should do and pushing myself to do it against my experience. So recently I've been trying to work much harder with irrational guilt. So I'll just give you it's a bit of a mundane example. It's important to me and anyone who lives at Triratna Loka. Because one of the things I find quite challenging about Triratna Loka is the walks and the talks. So I sort of came and I was like, right, you've got to meet up with every one of your group twice. And, for at least over an hour. And you've got to talk to them about spiritual life. And you've got to say something quite wise. It's like, oh God. It's incredible pressure to put on yourself. It's like, think of something sensible to say. So actually it's taken me quite a long time to undo that idea. One of them is that actually it's definitely good to meet up with people individually because you can explore things in a different way. And also I'm quite nosy, so I quite like to know about people's lives, which you can explore a bit one-to-one, a bit easier than in the group. But it's a bit like, actually communication is a vital mutual responsiveness. It's not necessarily going to come out in that context. And me trying to say something wise is so repressed and frightening that actually, in a way, it's better to just meet up with someone, get to know them, knows about and in their lives a bit, and they can nose about in yours. And if you feel like actually it'd be good to have another meeting to explore something in particular, or they want another meeting, or something arises in the group that needs a bit more time, then great. But don't feel like you have to do it. And the thing is that what I was finding is that on the retreats at Triratna Loka it's really easy. You're just basically busy all day because every break time you have to meet up with someone. And when it comes to the evening, you just go to bed, or I go to bed later and later and later and later because I just need a bit of time to contemplate the nature of the universe on my own. So anyway, coming back to Dr. Ambedkar, he said, a great man's duty is to know the principles, and if he is convinced of their value and their worth, to spread them. It's so simple, isn't it, really? Just to know the principles, and if you're convinced of their value and their worth, to spread them. I think what's called on me is a deeper faith that the ideals of Buddhism are universal, and exist independently of the institutions spreading them, that enlightenment is possible, and that the Dharma really does point to the truth. And there is a sort of magic that can happen when people come together on the basis of the truth. You know, I've really experienced this on this weekend, actually. You know, you can have people that you know that have got quite different ideas and views to you, but actually just meeting with them, practicing together, something can happen that's different. Something different can come into being. And I don't need to force that, and you don't need to force that. We don't need to impose our ideas on each other. And that in all of this, humanity and the growth of the individual is paramount. I remember Bhante saying that the first precept is mainly to get out of people's way. You know, if we're going to practice, the first precept is actually just to get out of the way of other people's growth and development. And being able to relate to each other's sort of human nature as well as their potential to Buddhahood, to see their humanity in all their humanity in all their kind of glory, as it were. And that's what we're facing now with Bhante. I think each of us have to come to terms with our own spiritual potential and our connection to the transcendental, and also our sort of human weaknesses and failings, or even not weaknesses and failings, just our human biography, as it were. There's a quote from the survey where Bhante says, "The human and historical biography of Gautama the Buddha is the story of the mystic marriage of the human and the divine, the individual and the universal, the terrestrial and the cosmic, the immanent urge and the transcendental ideal." And I think that exists in all of us. We have our roots in the earth and we have our roots in the sky. And we need to relate to each other from both those angles. And we need to relate to ourselves from both those angles. There's this wonderful part of the Parinibbana Sutta where the Buddha turns to his disciples shortly before his death. And he says to them, "It's through not understanding, through not penetrating the Four Noble Truths, have we run on and wandered round this long, long journey, both you and I." And it's the tenderness of both you and I, even the Buddha, who was an enlightened being, could see his own human biography throughout time. And the tenderness of that both you and I have wandered on this long, long journey. And we've still got further to go. So the Dharma is not some abstract thing. The Dharma is lived. It's lived in me. It's lived in you. It's lived in these human lives. And it also has the potential to bring the perfect into being. And again, we have to live with both. We have to live with both in ourselves and in Bhante. And it's out of that that the real magic can happen. I gave a quote from Nick Cave and I said that I've mellowed out, or suggested that I might have mellowed out. Actually, I haven't. I think I believe more strongly than ever of the necessity of the Dharma in the modern world and the necessity of the institutions that respond to that need. What I feel in myself is the sense that I've only just started. I have this constant feeling that I'm using about 1/10 of what I'm capable of at any one time. And actually, that conviction and that passion and intensity is growing inside me. But I also have more humility. I've got more energy and faith in the ideals, but I also don't think that I've got all the answers, and I'm much more willing to respond to that kind of human need in myself and others. So I just wanted to end by a poem actually by a woman mystic. It's one of the Bechenyas, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it, so I'll just carry on. She says, "Some are of the opinion that their success in love is great, so all the world blooms for them and turns green. But then we learn the truth and see that it is not so. For it is only our works of faithfulness that prove our progress in love. It is only our works of faithfulness that prove our progress in love."